So once again, my favorite student, good old Anne. What are the major biomes found in Canada? Well, let's see. What are the major biomes found in Canada? From your Sage, what? A, B, C, or D? A. Is that right? Yeah. We do have a little bit of temperate rainforest with the west coast here. We have that unique thing, but A. What two factors are most responsible for limiting life in a particular area? What did we say? C, precipitation and temperature. So this is a question, number 3. They love to do this on the provincial, but it'll probably be in color or a little bit easier to read than this black and white one. It says, what biome has an average rainfall of, so here's reading some kind of a climatograph or something like that. What biome has an average temperature of 15 degrees? So that's, I usually just go like that and kind of draw a line. And annual precipitation of 40 centimeters. You know what? The slanty sideways one, which is what? I think grassland, yes? Where is the boreal forest biome found? No. Above the Tropic of Cancer, yeah? In the north. Do you have to memorize which one's Cancer, which one's Capricorn? No, it's on that biome map. It's on that biome map that you'll have on the provincial and on the test. What are characteristics of tropical forests known for? Yes. Yes. Is the second one? Don't think so. So I think it's D, 1 and 3 only. Which best describes the distribution of communities on a tall mountain? Oh, boy. I'd have to look this up in the textbook. What'd you guys say, A, B, C, or D? Oh, boy, I heard a bunch of different answers. What was it? E? Thank you, whoever said that. Nice touch. With increasing elevation, tall trees are replaced by grasses. Okay, I'm kind of okay. I'm gonna kind of see. Okay, coniferous forest grows above the tree line. Trees don't grow above the tree line. That's what we call a tree line. So I can cross out A. Several biome conditions might be present depending on elevation, and there may be permanent ice conditions on top of the mountain. I don't think that's talking about the distribution of communities. That's talking about the distribution of biomes. So I'm going to nuke that. And I'm going to nuke that. I think the key idea is they're talking about communities. Remember we talked about ecosystems, communities, populations, and one more word, that organisms was the smallest. What's the correct order of biomes you would observe if traveling from the equator to the North Pole? No. Tundra is first, right? No. Oh, from the equator to the North Pole. Good gosh. So no and no. Tropical rainforest, I agree with. Then what comes next? You know what? No yet, because I know that tundra is the northernmost thing. So D's got to be wrong. And I know that boreal forest is the second most northernmost thing, right? Basically, aside from the Fraser Valley, West Coast, Vancouver here, as soon as you head to the interior, or anything, that's boreal forest. That's what Canada has mostly. Which of the following would be a biotic factor? Biotic means a living factor. No, yes, because earthworms are the only living thing there. Turn the page. In which of these does neither party benefit? No. Which one was neither party benefiting? Oh, sorry? A, competition? Oh yeah, commensalism, one party benefits, mutualism, both party benefit. So sure, A, I don't know. Yeah, competition, that's not good. If you were studying the niche of a bird species, what might you study? The food it eats, sure. Its predators, sure. You know what? All of these. Soil conditions are an example. That would be an example of an abiotic, I hope. The interaction between members of two different species that live together in the same ecosystem. That's probably symbiosis, but I'll come back to that. The interaction between species where one species benefits and the other is not harmed or helped, that I know is commensalism. What an organism does to survive in the unique conditions of the environment, that is a behavioral, 11 is 11. That's a behavioral adaptation. Physical feature of an organism, I'm skipping E. Physical feature, that's a structural adaptation. So 12 is F. Decomposers are an example. Biotic, I think. And I think this is symbiosis because I'm pretty sure this here is parasitism. G for which one? For symbiosis? G? This where one species benefits and one species is harmed. That's called parasitism, isn't it? Yeah. Short answer questions. Give two similarities and one difference between hot deserts and cold. Well, the difference, right? Similarities. The amount of precipitation. What else can you say about hot and cold deserts? What do they have in common?
Little or no water.
Sorry?
I said not a lot of water.
Little water? Okay.
Cold at night?
Both cold at night? This is something people often don't realize. They think a desert's hot all the way around. Actually, hot deserts get very cold at night. Okay. Explain the importance of adaptations to the survival of plants and animals in their biomes. You have to adapt to survive. I'm not going to get into that. See, I'm not wild about some of these questions. Explain why ecosystems with similar characteristics can exist in different geographical locations. Ecosystems with similar characteristics can exist in so it's all about if they have the same precipitation and temperature, if they're in the same biome, you'll often have a similar ecosystem showing up, but I'm not wild about that question either. I'm not going to collect this quiz. This is more just to get you thinking a little bit. So keep that as a study guide. Section 2.1, energy flow in ecosystems. It turns out all life on Earth is eventually recycled. Recycled. You're all going to die someday. Sorry.
Oh, no.
Death rate still 1-to-1. But you know what? It's also, in a weird, creepy, nerdy way, kind of cool in that all of the atoms that are in you right now have been passed on through millions, through billions of years, have been used in various plants or animals or people. None of the atoms that are in you right now are brand new. They were part of the earth when the earth formed. It's the great circle of life, Simba, the great circle of life. So in particular, when we're talking about life, think about what it would be like if the leaves that fall every year never decomposed, or if the body of every animal that had ever died was still lying where it had fallen. It would start to build up in a hurry. This chapter is about how energy moves into, through, and out of ecosystems. In particular, and how nutrients cycle through the ecosystems, getting used again and again and again. Some terminology. The word biomass refers to the total mass of living plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, insects in a given area. The amount of biomass is usually, Alex, given as an estimate because we can't ask every living thing in an area to step on a scale for us, please. And it's usually given in grams per square meter or kilograms per square meter. And if you have more grams per square meter or kilograms per square meter of biomass, what you're saying is that area is richer in a diversity of life than an area that has a lower biomass per square meter. What do you think has a greater biomass, plants or animals? Plants? Animals? Tree? Let's come back to that. With your neighbor, or out loud right now, rank the following, with 1 being the most and 4 being the least with respect to the total biomass in a 10-hectare section of forest. Which of these do you think would be the least?
Bears?
There might be one, maybe. Even though it's really heavy, I'm telling you, there ain't many of them. Which of those do you think would be the most? Now, to think about the rest, think about what eats what. So if there's the most grass, I think the second most, since it needs to get its nutrients from somewhere, will be the thing that eats the grass. Bears? Really? Oh, I want to go walking in the woods with you someday.
Don't bears eat grass?
They are omnivores. They eat berries, but they don't eat grass very often. Then, what eats caterpillars? Yes, some bears do, Alex, but basically you'll find that the number of a type of species often depend on the amount of biomass of its prey, or what it eats. I can't call grass prey because it's not living, what it eats. We call this energy flow. The transfer of energy through the ecosystem is called energy flow. Organisms, living things, obtain energy when they eat plants or animals. Simple sugars, carbohydrates. And organisms contribute energy to an ecosystem when they either are eaten or when they die and decay. So here's this lovely picture here. The starting point is the sun. Okay? The sun, all of our energy on the earth, with the exception of some small amounts of nuclear energy that are from stuff inside the earth, but let's ignore that. Tyra, all of the energy on the earth originated from the sun. So plants produce simple sugars from photosynthesis. Then what can happen? Well, they can die, they give off heat, or let's go this way here. We get abiotic chemicals. I think it goes this way. Abiotic chemicals, there's heat this way. Also, when the plants die, decomposers eat them and get the energy. So bacteria and fungus eat the decomposing plants. Herbivores eat the plants. Predators eat the herbivores. As they die, they're also eaten by decomposing funguses, decomposing bacteria. These give off abiotic chemicals, carbon dioxide, oxygen, nitrogen, and the plants take those in along with the solar energy. It's the great circle of life, Simba, the great circle of life. Put your pencils down. That's short animation, energy flow. Sadly, that video, that website is no longer up. They're doing fundraising to try and get it back up. It's cool animation, though. We divide energy flow into two categories. Producers and consumers. The main producer begins with the letter P. Plants. They initially produce all food. They convert energy from the sun into carbohydrates. Simple sugars. Food. Via photosynthesis. Alex, if that wasn't there, nothing else would happen. All other living things, with the odd exceptions, yes, there's weird life like down by the thermal vents at the bottom of the ocean, but for the most part, everything else either eats the plants or eats the things that eats the plants, or both, like bears. So, the amount of energy captured by producers determines the amount of life an ecosystem can support. And this is why in the last chapter I said the two most important things about a biome were temperature and precipitation, because they affect what plants will grow there. And what plants will grow there affect what life, what we think of as animal life, can live there. Consumers. Well, that's anything that eats a plant or another consumer. Food chains show the flow of energy in an ecosystem. And here is a word that we want to put a little star next to. Each step is called a trophic level. I guarantee that'll be on the provincial, or they'll use that in a question. Trophic levels show the feeding and niche relationships among organisms. And I should say, Kyle, they're simple to follow, but they're always too simplified. They never give the full picture, Matt, because life is far more complicated than what we're just going to let on. Okay? So, some terminology. We have primary producers. These are the first trophic level of a food chain. Plants on land. In the oceans, phytoplankton also can create nutrients. They're the bottom of the food chain. And algae. Then, on the second level, we have primary consumers. Primary producers are on the first level, Taylor. Primary consumers, this is your first level of stuff that eats the stuff below it. So they obtain their energy by eating, ingesting, if you want the fancy word, consuming primary producers. You want some examples? Grasshoppers on land. Bugs, most bugs on land. In the water, krill, because krill are slightly larger things that eat phytoplankton. What word do you think comes after primary? Okay, so then we have secondary consumers. They get their energy by consuming primary consumers. What eats grasshoppers? Birds, sure. Also some lizards, some reptiles, right? What eats krill? Let's say crabs, some whales, some, here's your secondary consumer. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers. Primary consumers, they're the first eating thing. They eat primary producers. All right, smarty humans. What comes after secondary? Tertiary. Very nice. Tertiary consumers eat secondary consumers. Birds eat grasshoppers. You know what? We can put the word frogs because that's what I was looking for. Frogs also eat grasshoppers. What eats frogs? Snakes? Other birds? What eats crabs? Seals? And we can keep moving up what you often called the food chain. It says reading check, page 59. I'm going to pass on that. We're cutting corners here. So here are two ways to show this idea of a food chain. You can do it with an ecological pyramid. Why is the pyramid nice? It's suggesting that the higher up you go, the fewer a number of those organisms this ecosystem can support. This ecosystem can support lots of primary producers, grass, Not as many herbivores, primary consumers, grasshoppers, mice, rabbits. Fewer primary carnivores or secondary consumers. And then even fewer tertiary consumers. Or you can look at this one here. So if we start at the very, very bottom, we have both a land and an ocean one. Primary producers, we have plants or phytoplankton. Primary consumers, we have krill, fancy word zooplankton, or an herbivore, grasshopper. Secondary consumer, carnivore, fish eat the krill, mice eat grasshoppers. Tertiary, bigger fish eat smaller fish, snakes eat mice. After tertiary comes quaternary, killer whales, orcas eat bigger fish, eagles might eat snakes. It keeps going up from there. You need to know, Allison, primary, secondary, and tertiary. Okay? But, being a bit of a nerd, yep. We just had lunch. You can wait for a while. What comes after tertiary? Quaternary. Quarter. Ask me in 10 minutes, okay, Dylan? Yeah. Quinary. Centenary. Septenary. Octenary. Nonenary. Denary. Although most of these terms are rarely used. I couldn't find a word relating to the number 11, but I did find one that relates to the number 12. It's duodenary. You need to know, boys and girls, these three. So this is hashtag nerd trivia. Oh, I typed it in there already, apparently. Forgotten that I typed it in after I photocopied it. So, next page. Another example of a food chain. There's all sorts of different ways to represent this. Julie, they're going to give you a food chain on the provincial and ask you some questions about it. They're not scary. They're fairly easy to read, but you got to do some thinking. So here we have the sun and water. Here's our primary producer, grass. Primary consumer, young grasshopper. Secondary consumer, snake. Tertiary consumer, hawk. And now we're going to give you some more vocabulary. When all of these animals, when the hawk dies, if it's at the top of the food chain, or the leftover gunk when the animals have been eaten, decomposers come in. And what these decomposers do is they break the nutrients down into simpler versions. They return it to the ecosystem because the grass eats the nutrients. So, some more vocabulary. What do you call an animal that only eats plants? Herbivore is correct. What do you call an animal that only eats meat? Carnivore. Alex, what do you call an animal that eats plants and animals like a bear? Humans are, for the most part, omnivores. Although some people have made a decision to go vegetarian or vegan. But for the most part, we'll eat anything within reason. We're not choosy. Don't believe me? Do a visit to Disneyland and look at the size of some of those people walking through that gate. If you go... We'll pause. Another new word. This one, there's a candy available. If anybody can tell me, and it is a vor, so herbivore, carnivore, omnivore, what do we call the consumers that obtain their energy and nutrients by eating the bodies of, that says sorry, I need to fix that, dead animals, dead plant matter, and animal wastes like manure?
Scavengers.
Nope. That's not the fancy science term. It's a something vor. What? Oh, you're very close. Detrivore. You may have heard the term detritus, which means waste products, or detrivores eat detritus. And although it's kind of disgusting, we owe them a huge debt because they clean up all the mess. Hey, again, think about what would happen if the leaves fell and did not decompose from year after year after year after year, 3 or 4 years already, and you'd be up to your eyeballs in leaves. So they feed at every trophic level. They are less fussy than us. They will eat primary producers after those primary producers die. In other words, when plants die, detrivores eat that. Yum. They will eat primary consumers, the grasshoppers. If the grasshopper dies of old age, detrivores will eat that. These are the things that break everything down.
What is a detrivore?
Fungus, bacteria, some types of worms, some types of beetles, some types of bugs. Yep. Maggots, the big one. Okay. And again, they're gross, but again, if we didn't have that, none of this system would work. Because what they're really doing is, because animals have eaten the grass and therefore absorbed the nutrients that the grass used, somehow the grass needs to get access to that nutrients again. They break it down enough to put it back. That's why anybody who does gardening, you want earthworms and things in your soil. If you don't have that, the soil is going to be dry and stuff's not going to grow. It is the great circle of life. In fact, food chains based on dead plant and animal matter, believe it or not, Courtney, actually outnumber food chains based on living plants and animals. You may not realize that, but there are far more food chains designed to deal with what to do with waste products and with stuff that dies than there is food chains that are designed for the whole predator-prey predation thing. So we have the word decomposition. That's the breaking down of organic wastes and dead organisms. And then we have got to write this right, degradation. That's the breaking up or breaking down of dead organic matter by living organisms, earthworms, dung beetles, maggots, all that yummy fun stuff. Okay. Well, these are very complicated, Matt, because, I mean, depending on how far you want to zoom out, you can have hundreds and thousands of species. So here's a simplified version. What we'll do is we'll create something called a food web. And this models the feeding relationship within an ecosystem. And I said, see below, I put it on the next page. Okay. Okay. See if you can figure out what this is supposed to be telling you based on which way the arrows point. What do the arrows tell you? The arrow points in the direction of what? A predator. You know what? Because not all of these are predators per se. Of a consumer. Let's use that. Arrow points towards something that'll eat you, whether you're living or dead or whatever. So that's why you'll see there are what we call these really key, or we're going to give these a special name. This is clearly an important species because a lot of arrows come from it or flow towards it. It looks like the Arctic hare feeds fleas. Dead Arctic hare feeds all the decomposition, all the detrivores. It feeds, its droppings also feed detrivores. Okay, ermine eats it, hawk eats it, falcons eat it, snowy owls eat it, wolves eat it, humans eat it. So what direction do the arrows point? Towards consumers. Towards consumers. Is that okay? Think about how much food you've eaten in your lifetime. Where did it all go? It did not go into your mass. Otherwise, all of you would weigh several thousand pounds over. You eat a lot of food over your lifetime. Turns out, between 80% to 90% of the food energy that you take in, it's used for the chemical reactions in your body. And it's eventually lost to the ecosystem as heat. All of you, if you put your hand on yourself, on your arm, you will feel it's warm. You're radiating heat 24/7, and that's actually a lot of energy. It's why, for example, you'll notice if you put a bunch of people into a crowded room, what happens to the temperature in the room fairly quickly. It gets really hot. Grad banquet being a great example there, okay? Gets really hot. Or the gym, the difference between the gym being empty and the gym, say, during assembly or during the air show basketball games when we pack several hundred kids, it gets hot. We radiate a lot of heat off. Or, again, the other classic one, in a car. If you sit in a car, you'll heat the inside of the car up pretty quickly, even without the heater going on. So very little food is actually used for growth. That's fairly consistent in most organisms. It turns out only around 10% of the food energy from one trophic level is available to be passed on to the next trophic level, which is why that pyramid was such a good example. As you move up each trophic level, look, now there's all this energy in this first trophic level, but only 10% of it is going to be available to be passed on to the next. Fewer animals there, fewer species, fewer organisms can survive off that much energy. And when those die off, there's even less for the next level. Yeah.
Is that why when people are teenagers, they just eat a lot more of this to help them grow?
That's part of it. Your body is also storing up for a growth spurt. Yeah. Little kids as well. There's, I think, 2 main growth spurts in kids, in humans. But you'll certainly, it would be why as you get older, seniors don't take as much food. And also their body temperatures change slightly. You may notice on a summer day, you'll often see seniors wearing more warm clothing than you might think is required. It's because they're colder. Okay. Food pyramids. A model that shows the loss of energy from one trophic level to another. And you'll see one, I did put one in your notes, yeah? Pyramid, yeah, okay. So it turns out the amount of life that an ecosystem can support is determined by how much energy, food, energy, and nutrients, is available to pass on to the next trophic level. And this may seem obvious, but this is why deserts don't have huge herds of animals. Are there lots of plants in deserts? No, and that's where the energy starts from. So you're already starting with a huge handicap, a much smaller amount of energy. You're never going to, in fact, where do herds of animals develop? On the huge grassland plains, either in North America or in Africa, or that's where you get large, huge herds of animals, because you're starting off with a lot of grass, you're starting off with a lot of energy on the primary trophic level. That'll work. Or, if you do have herds of animals where there's not much energy, like in the tundra, caribou have to, they got to go hunting for their food. Okay. So here is a good example of a food pyramid. You might have 1,000 kilocalories of energy in the grass, but you only keep about 10% of it for the next level. About 80 to 90% of it is used for the chemical processes to keep you alive. So even though you got 1,000 kilocalories, for the next level, 10%, 100 for the grasshoppers. And then for the next level, only 10 kilograms for the 10 kilocalories for the mice. And then you know what? For the owl, there's only 1 kilocalorie of energy available. You're not going to support very many owls. You've probably noticed that in terms of ecosystems, if you watch nature shows, there's always a bigger number of prey than there is of predators. And this is why. This is not an efficient system, but it works. This is, I've said it before, the great circle of life, Simba, the great circle of life. What's your homework? This online game, sadly, is no longer working. Okay. We're going to do page 64, reading check ourselves really quickly orally.